back from Hartfield. 1-0 Burnley. Scott Hartfield. He's been threatening that recently. And all the Burnley players run to the Darwin end. Oh, what a goal! What a goal from Robbie Blake! Burnley's first goal in the Premier League is something very, very special.
Wade Elliott has that change of pace and he's got away from Montgomery. It's the path of McCann and the follow-up finds the net. What a strike from Wade Elliott! A bolt from the claret and blue.
Oh goodness me! What a goal from Patterson! If that is to be the one that takes them to Wembley, you cannot argue with that. Pure quality.
Here goes Mike Conroy. Still time for a winner, maybe. John Francis! They came to York in their thousands. They're going home as champions.
I mean, if there's any justice in the world, Burnley would surely score from this corner. Swung right in there. Ball in there. Yeah! Michael Kennan! Oh, that's justice! That is justice at the Amex Stadium. Burnley are level and deserve to be.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Turfcast with me, Joel Redmond, and obviously through the door, again, we've got another new signing. It's Luke McNally from Oxford and I'm joined by George Elek, I hope I'm pronouncing that last name right, from the Not The Top 20 pod, who's an Oxford fan, and you also do some punditry as well for Sky and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Not The Top 20 podcast is our podcast, which covers all things EFL. We started it 6 years ago when Burnley were just getting promoted out of the Championship, so yeah, a lot of your fans wouldn't have had the opportunity to check it out, but yeah, do a bit of punditry for Sky, BBC, EFL and Quest as it was, but no longer. And yeah, looking forward to having Burnley back in the EFL, even though you guys are probably a bit gutted to be here.
Yeah, I'm going to say, I won't say. Well, it's one of them. Obviously, I'm gutted to be in the league, but now I'm kind of looking forward to it. That the Premier League, you know, it's one of them. You enjoy it. You want to be the best you can be. You want to play against the best, but there's only so much you can take. You know, finishing 17th, 18th, and things like that. Yes, we had a few good seasons in there as well. But last year, I think I went to 2 or 3 away games. You know, I just weren't feeling it as much anymore. So I'm looking forward to pretty much going to pretty much every single away game.
We get a lot of Norwich fans. We get a lot of Norwich fans who get in touch with us saying that they now actually prefer being in the Championship because they like going to games, scoring goals, winning games, rather than turning up every week expecting to get battered. So maybe you guys will enjoy it.
Fingers crossed. It's one of them, though, isn't it? I think Norwich probably expect to do well again, whereas some Burnley fans will. That's a bit of a debate. We'll see what happens. But they do well every time they come down. So if we're 17th at Christmas, you know, I'm not going to be that bothered that, you know, Rotherham can go to Norwich, for example, and win. You know, anyone could beat anyone on the day. But obviously, I mentioned you're an Oxford fan. So no one better to talk to us about our new signing. What are your original thoughts on the fact that Burnley bought him? What are your thoughts as an Oxford fan on losing him?
Disappointed, you know, for those Burnley fans who don't follow Oxford, which I'm guessing is most of them. Our recruitment model has been very good over the last kind of decade or so. You know, it all started with our League Two team under Michael Appleton, the best part of 10 years ago, which included players like Kemar Roof and John Lundstrom and George Baldock in League Two, who obviously all went on to play at a very high level. And that's been continued under Carl Robinson, especially with centre-backs. You know, we've had so many centre-backs coming through in recent seasons. Rob Atkinson, who's now at Bristol City, Rob Dickey, who's now at QPR, Curtis Nelson, who's now at Cardiff. Plenty of players who've basically gone on to be top-end Championship players. And probably in the case, I think, of Dickey and Atkinson will go further than that. And definitely in McNally's case as well. It feels to me like the McNally transfer has come at quite a frustratingly early point in his career for Oxford fans. You know, he only joined 18 months ago. He didn't play for the first 6 months because it was a case of getting him in the door and getting him ready for first team football. And even last season, even though he was, as we'll get on to, a brilliant player for us when he did play, because he'd come over from effectively part-time football at St. Pat's in Ireland, he was very much eased into the fold. I think he only played 30-odd games. From a business point of view, it's the best bit of recruitment I think we've probably ever done. You know, we signed a player for a 5-figure fee, and 18 months later, 30 games later, we've sold him for 2 million plus. I'm sure both a percentage of the next fee and also a cut. If you guys, or when you guys do return to the Premier League, it's normally a case of when rather than if for teams to get relegated, to given the parachute payments. So yeah, disappointed. I mean, a lot of Oxford fans are really annoyed about it. A lot of Oxford fans, because he was so good and because we probably haven't seen the best of him yet. A lot of Oxford fans would say, why are we, if we have genuine promotion ambitions, why are we selling a player? However, in Oxford's situation, we rent our ground from a previous owner who isn't very popular, Mr. Kassam, and he charges extortionate rent for our privilege to play there. So long as that's the case, sadly, we have to cash in when clubs come in and offer big money for our players. And crucially, McNally wanted to leave. And I think when you're a club in League One who have a reputation for bringing through young talent and being a stepping stone to the future, if you start standing in the way of that talent when they want to move on, it's going to make the next Rob Dickey, Rob Atkinson, Luke McNally probably think twice if they want to go to Oxford, if they get a reputation for not letting them move on. So, yeah, I understand it. I'm sad we're not going to see him again. I'm very excited to see how he gets on. And I think, as I tweeted yesterday, it feels to me like a proper transfer where it's good business for Burnley, it's good business for Oxford, and it's a brilliant move for McNally.
Yeah, you've touched on it already briefly, but you said he joined from St. Pat's and he didn't play much, if at all, in the first 6 months, and then you were sort of like eased into it. Is that because he was taking time to adjust it and perhaps he wasn't quite up to speed yet, or is he just not really get the chance in the first 6 months?
He was never going to play. Rob Atkinson, had made that position alongside Elliot Moore his own. He wasn't brought in. He was purely brought in as a succession plan for when one of those two left. That was it. I heard from those at the club in the 6 months where he wasn't playing that he was maybe the most exciting one that we'd had through. It was nothing to do with his ability. But I think it's only fair that when you have a player who's been playing part-time effectively in the League of Ireland, to expect them to come in and hit the ground running midway through a season without even a pre-season under their belt and usurp two quality players, it was going to be unlikely. I would definitely say to any Burnley fans who look back and think, hold on, this guy couldn't get into Oxford's team a year ago. It was nothing to do with, it was never the plan. We brought in a player from Ireland this January as well called Asheen Smith. Exactly the same things happened. He was barely included in a match day squad for the first 6 months. It's just the way that we do it. It's just the way that the club look to recruit from Ireland and spend a good kind of 6 to 8 months getting the player physically ready and drilling them in the way that Carl Robinson likes to play.
Yeah, fair enough. You mentioned there that obviously he came in with a plan to come into the side when certain players have moved on. It's a similar thing to what we've done with Nathan Collins, who's also an Irish central defender, a little bit younger actually. Collins is still 21, McNally's just turned 22, I believe. I don't know how much you know about Collins, but obviously I presume you've seen him play and stuff like that. But obviously Collins has played for Ireland a few times. McNally's only played at under 19 level. Where do you think he is in terms of development alongside Nathan Collins?
A fair way behind. I'll be really interested to see where the two are in kind of 3 or 4 years when they've both kind of. I think McNally, from what I know, he's a physical specimen. There's no denying that. But I remember watching an interview with him when he first joined, where he actually said he was quite a late developer physically. The fact that he has only played one, I think, Irish youth game is absolutely crazy in my opinion. And I think it shows just how late he developed into the player that he is now. Whereas Collins obviously had that foundation on which to build on at a much younger age. I remember thinking when McNally first came in, how surprising it was that he was already 21 years old or whatever he was. But I think it's just a case of coming to the boil a bit later. 22 years old for a centre back, 21 years old for a centre back is still incredibly young. And we saw last season in the season that he did play, even though he wasn't ever present, we saw how quickly McNally developed as a footballer as well. So I think that progression will continue. So I don't think it'll be very long until McNally's in the senior Ireland setup at all. And whilst Collins is going to be, you can put a 2 next to the 2 that he's going to go for fee wise. I'll be really intrigued to see where both of them are once they kind of plateau and they find their level as a senior pro.
Yeah, you mentioned that you tweeted yesterday as well, and I saw the tweet where you said it was a good deal for all parties. Obviously, the reports are it's around 2 million. So obviously, looking at Burnley's point of view, you mentioned why you believe Oxford has sold him and how it's good for you and it's good for McNally. Do you think we've got a good deal then at £2 million?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a bit of a frustration when you're a fan of a League One club that a we've seen it again with Rob Dickey was being touted for a £20 million fee in January when his form was good. Even now, after a poor second half of the season, there's rumours of him going to Everton for £10 million plus. We sold him for I think 1.5 to QPR. There's just a massive jump up from what you're going to get as a Championship talent compared to what you're getting in League One. So, McNally only has to probably play 20 games for Burnley in the Championship next season, do okay, and his value is going to rocket up. I think it's really smart recruitment. We do a 1 to 24 podcast in the week before the season starts, or not the top 20, which is always our most popular pods. And if you'd have asked me on the on the day the season ended last season, I'd have been pretty concerned about Burnley. Throughout the summer, I would say that is shifting massively. It feels to me like whoever is making the decisions at Burnley completely understands how to trade well within the EFL. They're going after Twine is a brilliant bit of business. McNally is someone who is kind of hiding in plain sight, but you're not going to see a lot of Championship clubs willing to take the plunge on a player for £2 million who's only played 30 games. But anyone who watches him can see that he's a bit of a Rolls Royce for centre-back and is only going to improve. You were in for Jed Wallace, who I know you didn't get, but you're shopping in the right areas, basically. It feels to me like whoever it is making the decisions, I can't imagine it's Vincent Kompany who's come straight in and said he wants to sign an Oxford centre-back. I don't think he's seen too many of our games, but whoever is calling the shots in terms of recruitment is basically fishing in the right pond, because shopping in League One, looking at players who are out of contract, who are proven in the Championship, that is a very smart way to go about your business, trying to get out of the Championship. When we've seen so many Premier League clubs in the past, Aston Villa was the best example, getting relegated and spending as if they were still, trying to get the cream of the crop they could in Europe, and it just doesn't really work. The players don't settle. I think it's a really good bit of business, and McNally doesn't have to do much to be valued at far higher than 2 million once he's got a few Championship games.
Yeah, obviously, he was in the League One team of the season last season, alongside Twine, who, of course, as you just mentioned, we have brought in. I think Twine was actually the League One Player of the Year.
Yeah,
there is a bit of a obviously gap in quality. The Championship's obviously a better league. Do you think he's good enough to be able to hit the ground running, or do you think he'll take time to adjust?
Is this Twine or McNally? I mean, I think we're probably with both
McNally,
of them.
Yeah.
With Twine, you're getting a player obviously who's kind of deserved his chance, given how dominant he was in League One. But with McNally, I don't think it's necessarily a case of the jump being too much. I think we fairly consistently see that top League One talent, especially top young League One talent, normally find their feet very, very quickly in the Championship. The only reason with McNally it might take time is just because he's played so few games. I mean, throughout his career, it's not even like he racked up 100 odd games at St. Pat's. He developed late. He has had an absolute whirlwind in terms of his progression over the last 2 or 3 years. And I've got no doubt that he's going to play a fair bit. I'm sure you haven't brought him in to play. I know Harwood Bellis is coming in, Ian Riley as well. You've got pretty high caliber, some pretty high caliber defensive players coming in, but he's going to get minutes. And I think you're going to see that he'll improve very quickly. In my mind, even though he is 22 and he's 6'4" and he's built well and he's physical, you should almost knock a couple of years off that purely on the basis of how little football he's played and how quickly you can imagine he's going to progress. He's not going to be, I think sometimes you expect a 22, 23-year-old to come in and be fairly polished. Whereas I think McNally still has a lot of improvement to go. And crucially, of all the centre-backs I've spoken about who now play Championship football, there's absolutely no question in my mind that McNally's got the highest ceiling. I don't think he's necessarily really got a ceiling because of the way that he plays and the range of skills that he has.
Just going on that ceiling then, because I was going to ask how far you think he can go in his career, not necessarily just at Burnley, but in his career. Obviously, you're saying he doesn't have a ceiling. You believe then he could play potentially for a top 6 or even a European side?
Yeah, I think so. And some Burnley fans might scoff at that and think, this is just a biased fan coming on. But Spurs were definitely interested in him in January. There was definitely a conversation, at least, between the two clubs. Again, Spurs are a side who've done pretty well with their EFL recruitment in the last couple of years. And again, it's because he's basically a blank canvas. If you think you've got a guy who, I'm sure we'll talk about the kind of players in a second, but he's very, very comfortable on the ball, both in terms of his passing, but crucially his ball carrying as well. He can play in a 2. He's very, very good at playing in a 3 as well, because he likes to carry the ball. If he plays in a 3, then the 2 other centre-backs can kind of shuffle inside and turn it into a 4. And he's physical and he's dominant in the air. Like that he is the kind of defender that I'm sure Vincent Kompany is going to look at and think to himself, this is a guy that I can really mould to be anything. And we often see especially with centre backs. You might think that when you're in your early 20s, it's a bit late to suddenly crash the scene in the Premier League, but you don't need to tell Burnley fans when you've got players like Ben Mee. You're never too late to prove yourself as being a top class Premier League centre back. You can progress into your 30s in that position as you learn the game more and you get a bit more streetwise. So I'm definitely not going to sit here and say Luke McNally is going to play European football. But in terms of where he could go, there's no question. If you guys have a great season this season and get promoted and he's playing 40 games at centre back, because of the kind of player he is, you look at the interest that Collins has got at the moment, it'll be exactly the same. It'll be the same kind of clubs in for him because he's got the skill set that would really appeal to sides who look to be possession heavy and want to invest in homegrown talent as well.
Yeah, let's talk about him as a player then. Obviously, his favoured position is, of course, centre-back, but can he do anything else, play right-back or maybe defensive midfield, centre midfield, or is it just a central back sort of like position?
I think he was chucked up top a bit when he was in Ireland, but that would probably be the one place I'd say where he could fill in. You don't want to play him at right-back, I wouldn't say, because his physicality is so important to the way that he wants to play. As I say, he does carry the ball. So in that sense, he could probably do a job there. He filled in at right back a couple of times when injuries said that when injuries necessitated it at Oxford. But he's very much a centre back. Again, his positional, I think when you're playing holding midfield, you have to be so positionally disciplined. You don't want a guy who's going to get on the ball, lift his head up and suddenly gallop up the pitch for 30 yards. But as I say, when he plays in that defensive three, I don't know how you guys are going to set up under Kompany. But if you do play three at the back, that's when he can really come into his own because then you get a bit more cover. If you're playing in a 4 and you start making those runs, you're relying on your right back to tuck inside and cover for you. Whereas in a 3, which we shifted to for the second half of last season, that was when he really came into his own and showed how good he is. As I say, he's a very, very good defender. He's got the pace that he even though he's a big guy, it's harder to do him on the turn, I would say, than some other centre backs we've had. He's very, very good in the opposition box from set pieces as well. He should score more goals, but he scored a few goals for us. I'm sure that'll be a trait of his going forward. And he's good defensively in our box as well. It's very, very hard to criticise him. The only issues we saw at times at Oxford were mistakes. He had a couple of moments where he was caught out of possession or he'd try and do too much on the ball and would be caught out. But when you're playing your first season in full-time English football, I think that's to be expected. And I think he's the kind of player where you really need to encourage that freedom. You don't want to turn him into a safe player and a tidy player because he is one of those few centre-backs who has that extra bit of talent and that extra bit of creativity and willingness to do something with the ball that not many of those players have. So, and it's something, again, that we saw Kompany do a fair bit as well for Manchester City. He was brave on the ball. He always looked to be positive on it too. And that's why, as someone who's going to be looking out for McNally going forward, I hope and I'm sure that part of his game will be encouraged.
Yeah, I were going to ask you about his best attributes, but we pretty much nailed them all there. Obviously, you mentioned physicality, you mentioned on the ball, how good he's on the ball. That's something I want to focus on because it's not something we'll be used to under Sean Dyche, like defenders who are good on the ball. It's normally the defender will get the ball, they'll lump it up to Barnes or Jay or whatever. So how good exactly is he on the ball? You said there he likes to run forward. Is that something you think he'll be encouraged at Burnley then, and something he's good at?
He's definitely good at it. He's definitely good at it. There's no denying that. And it was interesting. Rob Atkinson was very good at that before him, and McNally didn't really do it early on in his career with us. And it was something he brought into his game later on in the season, almost as if he'd been coached to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's opposition. The opposition don't really know what to do when you've got a 6'4" guy running full pelt at you. They kind of look to back off, and it's been very effective. As I said, I think whether he's encouraged to do it, whether we'll see that depends on the system that you play. I assume, given the type of defenders that you've been looking to bring in, McNally and the 2 City lads, I assume the style of play is going to change massively at Burnley. And given who the manager is as well, I assume it's going to be pretty possession-heavy stuff going forward, which would suit him as well. Although I guess Ballard, who of course nearly went, isn't the best with the ball at his feet. But if that is the way you're looking to play, I'm aware that if Ballard had gone through, the McNally deal was probably dead. It seemed like at the time. But even though Ballard has proven himself at the Championship and is probably a more robust defender at this stage, I think if you are looking to shift the playing style and looking to encourage, the team to play out from the back, then McNally's probably a better fit.
Yeah, fair enough. Obviously, I do want to pick your brains a little bit more about Burnley as a club. Obviously, we mentioned that you do work for EFL and Sky. Talking about the EFL, you're kind of like an EFL expert. You've said at first you was a little bit worried for Burnley, but now not so much. You mentioned the type of players. How do you think we're going to do this season then? Or do you think a lot more is focused on if we continue making the right moves in the transfer market?
I know there's, you kind of mentioned it yourself. I know there's some negativity within Burnley supporters. But what I would say is that teams who are relegated, and it frustrates me because I wish I could always, cheer for, well, not cheer for, but kind of push the chances of the minnows. But teams who get relegated from the Premier League, even after bad seasons, normally finish in the top 7 or 8. You had Swansea under Potter who finished mid-table, but that team got completely decimated. You have Huddersfield after they came down, who again finished kind of lower mid-table. But generally, even if you think back to Bournemouth a couple of seasons ago under it was Woodgate for the second half of the season and Jason Tindall for the first half, it was a poor season. It was poor enough that they lost their manager halfway through. They got into the playoffs. You look at Watford, who sacked Ivica Ivic halfway through the season, ended up getting promoted automatically. The gap between the Premier League and the Championship is massive. I would also say that you were far better last season than both Watford and Norwich. There's no question about that. Under Dyche and after Dyche was sacked as well. I know that you've obviously let go a lot of key players from that season, and I also, Collins is going to be a big miss as well, and you need to bring a striker in, at least one. But in my book, it seems bizarre. I think the negativity has gone too far. I think you are still a side with lots of Premier League quality running through it. I think Kompany is a pretty exciting manager to come in terms of the players that he's going to attract. And also the fact that he's there alone suggests to me that he's pretty convinced that Burnley is a club who aren't, destined to continue to fall. I'm pretty bullish that that Burnley will be a side very much towards the top end of the table next season. And I think, looking at the bookmakers odds and stuff, if I was doing my book, you'd be a lot closer to Norwich and Watford than you currently are.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm shocked that last time I checked, we were 14-1, whereas the likes of Norwich were 6-4. I did find that a bit bizarre, but I did see a lot of people saying earlier in the season, like you said, earlier in the summer, that people did fear for us. I always thought we'd be there or thereabouts.
It's crazy on the betting stuff. It is crazy that you can get, you can back Burnley to get promoted at 9-2 and Watford to win the league at 6-1. I mean, that is just the price difference is barely there, and you're talking top 2 finish or winning the playoffs at Burnley. I think the narrative has gone way too far, and people are forgetting that you were better than both last season, and I think you probably have the means. Although, having said that, Watford and Norwich fans aren't particularly positive this season either. The strength of the league looks fairly weak, I think, in this renewal, given that all 3 sides aren't necessarily coming down. You don't have a team, as we've seen, especially during COVID times. You don't have a team who get relegated and then keep all of their key players. Bournemouth had Danjuma playing in the Championship a couple of years ago. I mean, it was ridiculous that was the case. That doesn't seem to be happening this time around. Same with Buendia and Norwich. The teams getting relegated, losing their key players, and of the best of the rest, like Sheffield United, Middlesbrough, it's quite easy to pick holes in all of them. So it doesn't look like a particularly strong. And then you've got Luton and Huddersfield who were in the playoffs last season as well, who again are only going to have mid-table budgets. So it doesn't look like the strongest league, and I think Burnley are very much well set to be up there.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Obviously, we've lost Tarky and Ben Mee and Pauper. We've still got Collins. I'm feeling hopeful we can keep him, but there's been a few. Obviously, we're signing so many central defenders. A few people are getting a bit worried, but fingers crossed, it's Collins alongside one of the new lads. Last one from me. Just want to give everyone, let everyone know where they can find you. Give your podcast and stuff a shout out. You mentioned you got a 1 to 24 coming up as well, so where they can find all that.
Yeah, so if you go, it's called Not the Top 20. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on all podcast platforms as well. We do a Monday show, which is just reviewing all the weekend's action. We do a Thursday preview show, which is a betting preview as well, so you get tips there too. So yeah, come and check it out. We're aware that normally most football fans support their club and then listen to Premier League podcasts, but hopefully if you listen to us, we can show you that the EFL is more exciting than just your club as well.
Yeah, well, you've been a great guest, mate. So I'm sure we'll see you again at some point during the season. But thanks for coming on, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Joe. Anytime.